There's a ghost on your back, Auntie,
said my 5-year-old daughter, pointing at my sister-in-law. We were busy preparing for my mother's memorial service when my daughter said this, and we were all surprised.
It's the time of year when our ancestors come back,
my brother said casually with a laugh. In contrast, my sister-in-law turned red and raised her voice.
Don't say things like that.
Surprised by her sudden anger, I stopped cooking. However, my daughter continued.
but that ghost.
At this, my sister-in-law suddenly started trembling and turned pale. We were puzzled by her reaction, but later, we learned the shocking reason behind it. After getting a job, I moved to a city and met my husband at work. We got married when I was 28, and later, we had our daughter, Mia, and lived happily. Mia actually has a sixth sense, but it's a secret between her and me. Once, when a friend of mine came over, Mia said,
There's a man on your back.
and scared her. To prevent young Mia from being looked at strangely by others, I made a promise with her. Let's talk about ghosts only with Mommy. We lived our daily lives with this promise. Unlike me, my brother, who is 3 years older, chose to work locally. He got married 7 years ago, had a son, and lived with our mother in our family home. Since I live far away and can't visit often, I was grateful to my brother and his wife, Sophia, for living with our mother. However, I noticed a bit of tension between my sister-in-law and my mother whenever I returned home once or twice a year. I casually mentioned it to my brother, but he seemed completely unaware of the delicate relationship between his wife and our mother. One year during summer holiday, my brother's family, my mother, and my family gathered for a barbecue in the spacious backyard. The pizza oven and barbecue area, which my father had built by hand before he passed away, were often used for gatherings with friends and family. As the barbecue food was nearly done, I suggested a family trip to my mother. She looked a bit tired, and I wanted her to refresh herself. Hey, why don't we all go on a trip during the 3-day weekend in October? I heard there's a highly rated hotel with delicious buffet meals and a spa, I said, pulling a hotel brochure out of my bag and showing it to my mother. The brochure featured photos of open-air baths and relaxing stone saunas.
Wow, that sounds wonderful. It's been so long since I've been on a trip,
my mother said, her eyes sparkling as she looked at the brochure. At that moment, my sister-in-law clattered the dishes she was holding onto the table.
Are you planning to waste money again?
She said coldly. I was surprised and looked at Sophia. My mother's expression darkened immediately.
That's not my intention. It's been a long time since Mary could take a break during a long weekend, so I thought a little enjoyment would be nice.
My mother began to explain hastily to my sister-in-law, but her expression remained cold. We've never had the chance to go on a trip together, and I thought it might be nice for you to join us this time. I quickly tried to support my mother.
There's no way we can afford such an expensive hotel, right? You need to consider our household budget. Or is Mary going to pay for everything?
She said, looking at me without a smile. I couldn't say anything in response, and my mother fell silent, looking down.
Well, our son is starting elementary school next year, so we have a lot of expenses.
My brother, who had been listening to the exchange, said in a leisurely tone, trying to help, but the atmosphere remained heavy. After that, There was hardly any conversation, and as we quietly cleaned up, only the sound of cicadas echoed in the evening twilight. In February of the following year, while I was eagerly packing clothes into my suitcase, I suddenly received the news that my mother had passed away. My husband and I were busy with work and couldn't return home during the New Year holidays, so we were preparing for a late visit. My mother, who had no particular illnesses and prided herself on her health, was gone. What on earth happened? In my shock and sorrow, I immediately contacted my brother and learned that she had drowned in the bath. I had heard that many elderly people collapse in the bathroom due to sudden changes in blood pressure caused by the temperature difference between the room and the bathwater. However, I never imagined it would happen to my mother. She had been so happy when I suggested the trip. Tears welled up as I regretted not taking her to the trip, even if it was just her. The funeral was held quietly, but during the service, my daughter looked at me a few times as if she wanted to say something. However, I was too overwhelmed with grief and confusion to pay attention. That summer, I returned home for my mother's memorial service. There was a lot to do, and time flew by as my brother, sister-in-law, and I were busy with preparations. Relatives gathered one after another, and the house was bustling. My daughter, who had been quietly reading a book with my brother's son, suddenly stood up and pointed at my sister-in-law.
There's a ghost on your back.
The adults around her paused for a moment and looked at her, but soon resumed their tasks, laughing and saying, "Maybe children can see things we can't," and that could be true.
It's the time of year when our ancestors come back.
My brother said with a relaxed laugh, patting my daughter's head. However, Sophia, who had been pointed at, turned red and started to get angry.
Don't say things like that.
She snapped. Mia, who had been suddenly scolded, looked up at her in surprise.
But that ghost is Grandma.
My daughter continued. At that moment, Sophia turned pale and began to tremble. Something's wrong. My brother was puzzled by her sudden change, but knowing that Mia had a sixth sense, I started to think about the meaning of her words. Could it be that my mother's death wasn't an accident? Determined to find out the truth, I decided to investigate what had happened to my mother. However, since I was married and it wasn't my house anymore, I felt uneasy about searching through the house on my own. So, I decided to ask my brother for help. Just then, I heard from my brother that my sister-in-law was going to her parents' house for 3 days with her son. Seizing this opportunity, I quickly prepared and headed back to our family home to investigate with my brother. Upon arriving, I immediately went to my mother's room. Inside, I found a small desk with photos of my father and her 2 grandchildren, along with gardening magazines, her favorite hobby. Seeing these remnants of my mother made my heart ache. However, I took a deep breath and reminded myself that this was not the time for sentimentality. I started by opening the drawers of the dresser that my mother had brought with her when she got married, from the top down. There were only a few clothes, untouched since her passing. When I reached into the back of the bottom drawer, I felt something hard. What is this? What I touched was a small notebook, which turned out to be my mother's diary. As I flipped through the pages, I gasped.
Mary?
My brother called out, snapping me out of my shock. I turned around. This?
What's wrong? Are you okay? I found this in Sophia's room.
He handed me a piece of paper before I could show him the diary. The moment I saw it, I was convinced that my mother's death was not just an accident. A week later, I visited my family home with my husband and daughter. The house felt empty and lonely without my mother. That day, the children were tired from playing and started dozing off early, so my husband took them to the bedroom. Seizing the opportunity, I called out to my sister-in-law. Sophia? Could you come to the living room? I need to talk to you. She looked a bit annoyed at being interrupted from her chores but followed me.
What is it? Why so formal all of a sudden?
She asked, crossing her arms and staring at me. It's been 6 months since Mom passed away. Sophia, isn't it time you told us the truth?
What are you talking about?
She replied, her expression remaining cold. I pulled out my mother's notebook from my bag and held it out to her. This is the diary Mom kept. I'm going to read what she wrote. Sophia's eyes seemed to flicker for a moment. Recently, I can't wake up in the morning. Even though I get enough sleep, my head feels foggy, as if I'm in a mist. Sometimes, this feeling lasts all day. My mother started writing about her health changes in her diary last December. She detailed her symptoms meticulously, perhaps worried about the gradual changes in her previously uneventful daily life. It was written that she often felt dizzy and could barely walk, but my sister-in-law strongly insisted that she go shopping, so she forced herself to go out. The diary continued, after meals, I often feel extremely sleepy and can't concentrate. I even went to the hospital, but they couldn't find the cause. As I read the diary aloud, I could see my sister-in-law's face growing tense. Even when Mom couldn't bear the sleepiness and lay down on the sofa, you forced her to take a bath, didn't you?
What? It's normal to take a bath every day. What's wrong with that?
My sister-in-law replied, her voice tinged with irritation. And you made her do things even when she was feeling unwell? You didn't listen when she said she wanted to rest?
I have a job too, and I'm busy. It's only natural to expect a little help from her since we live together, right?
She showed no remorse.
And how do you know that what's written in that notebook is true? Maybe she wrote lies to make me look bad.
She added with a faint smile, as if suggesting I was making it all up. Seeing her reaction, I pulled out my final trump card. Then what is this? I thrust a crumpled prescription in front of her. This was what my brother had found in Sophia's room. Were you trying to make it look like an accident by giving Mom a large dose of this medication that induces drowsiness? The symptoms of sleepiness and dizziness are caused by taking a large amount of this drug.
Stop making accusations. This is my medication.
She turned away with a huff, trying to dismiss my claims. Just as my anger was about to reach its peak, the door suddenly opened with a clatter, and we all turned to look. Standing there was my daughter, who was supposed to be in the bedroom.
Grandma on your back is angry.
She pointed at Sophia just like she did during the memorial service. Sophia turned pale instantly.
Stop it. There's no such thing.
Sophia snapped.
But she said it during the memorial service too. She said you killed her.
My daughter retorted, undeterred by Sophia's outburst. What Mia is saying is true. I kept quiet to avoid scaring anyone, but my daughter can see spirits. I said, rushing to Mia and placing a hand on her shoulder with a smile. Thank you. Grandma is surely grateful that you had the courage to tell us. I said, encouraging my daughter to return to the bedroom. She nodded and I closed the door. Sophia muttered to herself.
That can't be. But
why did you harm my mom?
It wasn't me.
She snapped, glaring at me. At this point, my brother, who had been silent until now, spoke up.
I want you to tell the truth. If we test Mom's blood, we can see if it matches the medication from that prescription.
How are you going to get blood from someone who's already been cremated? Are you stupid?
She scoffed. She laughed dismissively, but in reality, blood had been taken from my mother's body to investigate the cause of her death. Hearing this, Sophia realized she couldn't escape and confessed.
I've had enough of this rural life. No stylish shops, no cafes. I'm fed up. I wanted to sell this house and use the money to move back to the city,
She said, avoiding our eyes. Finally, she admitted.
I wanted her to leave as much of her assets as possible. That's all there is to it.
She said with a defiant expression. I was stunned by her words.
So you took Mom's life? You took a family member's life for something like that?
My brother asked. My brother's voice, red with anger, trembled with rage, but she remained unfazed by his words.
I thought this house and the large garden would fetch a good price if sold. But she said she never wanted to leave this place until she died, so I had no other choice.
Knowing how much my mother cherished this house, I couldn't believe my sister-in-law's cold words. This house is filled with not just our memories, but also our parents' love. Don't talk about selling it so easily. You need to face your crime and reflect on it. I reached for the phone to call the police. Seeing my actions, Sophia's face turned pale, and she suddenly changed her attitude, clinging to me.
Wait, don't call the police. In this rural area, rumors will spread quickly. Please, don't do this.
She pleaded. But I shook off her hand and looked at her sharply. I will never forgive you for taking my mom's life for your own greed. Realizing the gravity of her actions, she finally slumped in defeat. She stood motionless, even as the sound of police sirens approached. She was taken away by the police and later confessed to her crime, spending a long time behind bars. My brother divorced Sophia and received a lump sum of $150,000 from her property settlement, which included alimony and child support for their son. He said he wants to create new memories with his child in the house our parents left us. 3 months have passed since then, and today is the monthly anniversary of my mother's death. I sat on the porch of our family home, watching my daughter and my brother's son play with a ball in the yard.
Hey, we're ready to go to the grave.
My brother called from the parking lot. The 2 kids cheerfully replied, okay, and we all got into the car and headed to the cemetery where my mother rests. When we arrived at the grave, my daughter said,
I think I heard someone's voice.
looking around curiously. It might be Grandma. Mia nodded and smiled happily. At that moment, an unseasonably gentle and warm breeze brushed my cheek. It felt just like the warmth of my mother that I remembered from my childhood.
How did you like this story? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. See you in the next video.